Peel. And Danielle is a public education coordinator. And the Peel group has developed education tip cards and a fire information sheet that can be used to prepare a firefighter or fire personnel when engaging with the persons living with dementia. So even although Danielle is representing Peel, this program can be implemented into any other community chapters. So please welcome Danielle. Danielle, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I also had some tech issues, so I'm sorry for being late. But thank you so much for having me. Yes, I've been with the Alzheimer Society for 22 years, so a very long time. My background is social work and gerontology. And the Alzheimer Society of Ontario started working with first responders, which includes EMS, fire and police services around the province. And they created working groups and came up with some tip cards, some communication cards, some tools basically that can be used by fire services. So each group, police services, fire group, and the EMS group all have different toolkits depending on the type of work they do, right? And so what I'm going to present today is some of the tools that have come out of that working groups. I myself serve Peel, so I serve Brampton, Bolton, Caledon, and Mississauga. But these toolkits were created provincially across the province. So if you are in other areas, then you'll have an Alzheimer's Society chapter that serves your area, but the toolkit's the same, like the tools are the same. So they were created for provincial. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen with you. All right, are you all able to see that okay?
Yes, Danielle, it's good. Thanks.
Good, perfect. Okay. There was lots of discussion. A lot of people asked me, why do we not have a silver service? Like if you're in the US, for example, and some other states, especially Florida, and someone goes missing, a senior goes missing, they have the silver alert, right? Works like the Amber Alert. In Ontario, and the government here in Canada decided that they'd rather focus on prevention and messaging around what can happen if someone goes missing and trying to prevent those missing incidents up front than having putting the money into an alert system to alert after something's occurred, right? So Finding Your Way was created, and Finding Your Way is a website with all kinds of good safety tips and things for people living with dementia and their family caregivers. So I'll be sharing that with you as we go along, the website for that, as well as the working groups and the tools for our first responders, because you work with the public and you are interacting with the public all the time. So currently, this is what our numbers look like. We have 500,000 people living with dementia in Canada currently. This number is expected to rise significantly in the next little while. And this is because we have aging population in Canada. We have a significant proportion of the population who will be 65 and over in the next 25 years. So we are expecting this number to rise to well over 1 million by the year 2035, right? So we're going to have bigger numbers, which means we're going to have a lot of people living in our communities, especially an area like Peel, where we have a large concentration of population, right? So we are going to have a lot of people. 76,000 persons are diagnosed each year currently. 912,000 Canadians are predicted to be living with dementia by 2030. As I said, over 1 million by 2035. And 1 in 5 people are now care partners. They are family care partners for someone living with dementia. So it's very going to be a very common experience for people in our communities. So I'm going to use the word dementia, and one of the most common questions I get is, what is it? Because people have heard of Alzheimer's, but they may not have heard of dementia. So dementia is the umbrella term. It's sort of like if you said someone has cancer and then the very next question is what type do they have? That's like saying dementia. Dementia is just a very general term for a whole host of diseases of the brain. Alzheimer's is just one of them. It's the one most people have heard of, but there are some other common diseases of the brain that affect large portions of our population. So the next most common is vascular dementia, followed by Lewy body dementia, followed by frontal temporal lobe dementia. And frontal temporal lobe dementia has 6 diseases under that heading. So it's an umbrella term too. So it gets more and more complicated. But that's just to say that not everybody living in our community who has a diagnosis of dementia has Alzheimer's. They may have one of these other diseases of the brain. Robin Williams, the actor comedian, he actually had Lewy body dementia. Bruce Willis has just come out with a diagnosis of a frontal temporal lobe dementia. So it's becoming more and more known in the media about these other diseases other than Alzheimer's. But yes, large portions of our population could have any of these. And they put the person at significantly higher risk for things like fires, for sure. And so we need to be looking at that. Okay, so this one won't apply to you guys too much, but some people will experience dementia symptoms, and actually it could be caused by something other than a irreversible brain disorder. And so these are some of the reasons that somebody may, if you are responding to calls, may have like delirium. So a lot of times people assume somebody has dementia when in fact they may have delirium. So delirium is where the person's very disorientated to person and place, but it may be due to an underlying infection, which is actually a medical emergency if they have delirium. So we don't want to assume that everybody we meet who comes across as confused or disorientated is a person living with dementia, right? It could be delirium. They also could just not be hearing you because they don't have their hearing aids in and they require those, or they have like macular degeneration, a vision impairment. So not everything is dementia, but certainly we'll have those people. So if someone is living with dementia, they're going to have some changes in their abilities, right? When you think about what the brain does everything. So the moment that the brain becomes diseased with something irreversible and progressive, the person is going to start to have some difficulties. So they may not know who's around them, the people around them, they may not recognize them. They may not know where they are. They may not know time of day. They may be disorientated to time. So they may leave the house in the middle of the night thinking it is daytime, for example, even though it's dark out and the street lights are on. Those environmental signals they may not pick up on due to their brain changes. They may have responsive behaviors. They may respond to things quite differently in their environment than they may have before. So they'll repeat themselves. It's important to note, especially with fire services, that some people living with dementia as a result of the brain changes will start to hoard. So sometimes hoarding becomes an issue. They may pace or become agitated. They may have trouble in their environment recognizing where things are in relation to them. So they have more chance of falls because they actually don't perceive depth perception properly. So that's a brain change that occurs. And so they may have more falls. So they may experience that. Physically, with their walking, they may start to shuffle when they walk instead of lifting their feet. So again, higher chance of falls, especially with like loose carpets, loose bath mats, things like that. And then their emotions can actually be affected by brain changes too. So they may have sudden, less control over their emotional state than they previously would. So quicker to frustration, quicker to anger, quicker to sadness than in the past. So how do we know somebody may be a person living with dementia? They may not understand the current situation. So I love that Jamie said, you know, we're standing outside the door and we're trying to explain that we're the fire services, and this person, this lady living with Alzheimer's on her own, she's not opening the door for us because she's not grasping you know, even when we're pointing to, and I like that he said we pointed to symbols, like we pointed to our our patch and stuff, because yes, visual aids are easier for people living with dementia than words. So yes, pointing to things was a really great idea. But yes, they may not understand the situation or be able to sort out the obvious. They may, you may have to repeatedly try to communicate who you are and why you're there. As I said, that less emotional control. So they actually might start crying out of fear as a result of you coming to the door. They may have a blank facial expression, and that's due to brain changes. So it's not what they actually might be feeling, but you might see is a very flat, effective emotion on the face. If a person just stands still and just sort of looks around for long periods of time, that's a good indicator of confusion or disorientation to their space around them. If they're, you know, it's January and they're wearing shorts and a t-shirt, right? They're not dressed appropriately for the weather. That's another really good indicator that the person may not be very orientated to season and place, time. These are some other things that you may see on a person living with dementia that may help you to recognize that they're a person living with dementia. So the number one thing I would say is the medical alert bracelet. So if somebody is wearing a medical alert bracelet on their wrist, or they're wearing a necklace with a medical alert symbol on it, and the symbol is blue instead of red. So same symbol, but blue instead of red. That is the outward sign or the tell that the only people who wear the blue are people with cognitive impairments. So if their symbol is blue, it means that dementia or some other cognitive impairment is present for that individual. So that's one of the easiest sort of things to look for. If they have a blue umbrella on their door or windows, like on a window of a car or on the window of the house, that is also the symbol. The blue umbrella is a symbol for dementia. So that's a way of also maybe identifying the person may have dementia. Not everybody will put that on their door or window, but some will. And some families will put it on the door or window of someone who lives alone living with dementia. The police services, and most of them across the Greater Toronto area, do have a vulnerable person registry that you can tell families about. It is free. So if a family is supporting someone living with dementia in the community, they can register for free their family member on the vulnerable person registry. So York region has it, Peel region has it, Toronto Police Services have it. So most of the Greater Toronto area police services in Ontario do have it. And so it's really great because if the person goes missing, then all the information is already listed on the Peel Regional Police's Vulnerable Person Registry, including a recent picture. So they every year they upload a new picture of the person. So it's a current recent picture. And it also gives some ideas of where the person might have gone. So common spots they've been found before, or common places the person might go to. If you live in, if you're a service in Caledon, they have the Project Lifesaver, which is a radio tracker. So if you see this white, what looks like a watch, but does not have the face of a watch on it. So if you see a person wearing this and you're in Caledon, the person definitely has a cognitive impairment. They definitely have dementia, and they have a tracker on. In Peel, the rest of Peel, they used to have Project Lifesaver. Police services have done away with it, but they do still have it in Caledon. So just to let you guys know. And families can also fill out on the Finding Your Way website a Finding Your Way ID kit. That's really great information to share with families. They can fill out this Finding Your Way kit. Okay, so common situations. So persons living with dementia are at higher risk of getting into car accidents. So fire services, of course, when someone calls 911 for a car accident. There's often with older adults still driving, when accidents have occurred and they're at fault, it's often because of dementia. Person living with dementia may have risky driving behaviors, and they may have had their license removed, but due to memory impairment, they forget that their license has been removed. So they don't keep track of that, and they just go out with the keys, get in the car and go. So that happens too. For fires, persons living with dementia may not understand the concept of smoke detectors. So I know we like to get out the messaging about smoke detectors, but so for instance, we had one one gentleman who had Alzheimer's disease living alone, and he kept every time that his smoke detector was working, and he kept like leaving pots and pans on his stove unattended, right? So the smoke detector would go off. Every time the smoke detector would go off, he'd pick up the phone. So he was mistaking the fire alarm for a phone ringing. So he interpreted that as, oh, well, my phone's ringing. So he'd pick up the phone. And so instead of turning off the burners, calling 911, using a fire extinguisher, getting out of the house, he didn't do any of that. He's picking up the phone, thinking the phone is ringing, right? So they might not understand what to do in case of a fire, and they may not understand why a firefighter is at their door or has come to their home. And it may be because smoke or gas were smelt and a neighbor has called, or the neighbor hears the fire alarm and calls, especially in apartment buildings and stuff. Hoarding and going missing. So as I said, people living with dementia have a higher chance of starting to hoard. So they may lose judgment, may no longer be able to identify safety risks. They may not recognize violations of fire codes. And we do know that 6 out of 10 people living with dementia will go missing at some point during the span of their disease. It is not something that just happens later in the disease. It can happen even early on. People who actually are in very early stages and may not have had their license removed, their driver's license removed, yet often go missing. Their missing incidents are actually higher safety risks because, well, one, they're in a moving vehicle. 2, they can get a lot further away. So there's some heightened risk with that. So how do we approach a person living with dementia? How do we communicate with a person living with dementia? So something a lot of people don't realize is people living with dementia, especially Alzheimer's, can lose their peripheral vision. So if you approach them from, the back or the side over here, the person may not actually see you. They may not be able to even interpret that you're there. So approach from the front, right? Because if they get limited peripheral vision, this is what they see, which is just what's in front of them. So approach from the front. Some people living with dementia, their brains can no longer filter out all kinds of things going on. So imagine a smoke alarm is going off, or at a car accident scene, there's all kinds of people and sirens and all kinds of things going on. The person living with dementia may not be able to focus on a conversation you're trying to have with them. So you're trying to ask them questions, gather some information. They might not be able to concentrate on that conversation with everything else going on. So moving them off to a quiet space so that their brains, what happens is it doesn't filter all the background information. So it's coming at them all at once. And so it makes it difficult for them. So moving them to a quieter space to concentrate on just what you're asking them will make it a lot better communication for them. With some conditions of the brain, you would tell people maybe to not make eye contact, but with people living with dementia, that eye contact is actually really important. It indicates I'm listening, like I'm listening to you and I'm paying attention to you. Be aware of your body language. Persons living with dementia, when they aren't sure of what's going on around them, can be fearful. So if we have really positive body language and tone of voice, so if we keep our tone pleasant and we keep an open body language. So for me, this is a closed body language. When we cross our arms. When you stand with your palms open and to the side, that is a non-threatening body language that indicates to the person living with dementia, I'm not here in any way to harm you or to hurt you. I'm here to help, right? So we just indicate that with our body as well as our tone of voice. Create a safe space. So that's what I mean by taking them away from the chaos and letting them be able to calm down and focus. If you speak clearly and calmly, if you ask a question, really make sure you ask them one thing at a time, like ask one question at a time, and you will have to give the person longer to respond to you. So we call it the 20-20 rule in communicating with someone living with dementia. So you give them 10 seconds to process the information you just gave or you asked, and you give them another 10 seconds to get their response out. So often they have word finding difficulties. They have a slower processing speed as a result of their brain changes. So it just takes longer. It's not that they can't communicate, it just might take longer to get it out. If we start to ask more questions before they've had a chance to answer the first question, we're confusing that damaged brain, and then they just get flustered and then they just kind of shut down. So we do want to give like that extra time and space to respond. The simpler you can make the question, the better. Open-ended questions are really hard for people living with dementia. So how did this happen is an open-ended question the person might have difficulty with. If you ask them questions that can be answered with yes or no, that will get you a lot further and a lot quicker in what's actually happening, right? So if you say to them, did the fire alarm go off? Yes or no. Were you cooking? Yes or no, right? So yes, no's are a lot easier for them. We use a calm and clear tone, but we never speak to them down as if they're not adults, because these are adults. So we try not to, I mean, we really recommend people don't use like, oh, sweetie, or honey, or dear, right? I mean, that's not a respectful way to address an adult that you don't know, right? So just keep the tone respectful. Really important to identify yourself, and you may have to do it several times. Like you may have to really repeat yourself. If you feel like they're not grasping at all why you're there or for what reason, you may want to write it down and have them read it. So sometimes the part of the brain that's damaged is early on in Alzheimer's is for verbal information. So you're telling them things verbally, but they're not getting it. So in the case where Jamie said we're standing outside the door, they could have written a little note that said we're fire services and here for, and then put that up against the window for the person to read. It's a different part of the brain for reading comprehension, and it's usually not as affected with Alzheimer's till later in the disease. So writing out a message may be a better way to get the message across. Avoid reality checking or testing. So the person may give you false information. So they may say to you, you may say to them, do you know what month it is? Or do you know where you are? You might say to them. And so here we are, maybe they're in Mississauga, and it's 2023, and they say to you, sure, it's Scotland in 1960, right? So they're obviously disorientated to place and time, and that may happen. They often focus on the past because that's in their long-term memory, and the long-term memory is working and the short-term memory is not. So that might happen. You might have to do a lot of observation with your eyes to what is happening in a situation, as opposed to getting the information correctly from the person living with dementia. Because as I said, they may give you some information that's correct and some of it might be really incorrect, right? And so some of that might not make sense. And I always tell that to border services, because I do border services training as well for Canada Border Services officers. And, yes, this person may, what are you coming into the country for? They may give answers that do not necessarily make sense, but they make sense for the person who's living with dementia. So there are some resources. One is the Finding Your Way website that I talked about. Directing families there is a really great idea. There's also some online modules on the Finding Your Way website that are meant for first responders. So this is a place you could direct your fire services to, and they could do these online modules. It goes over the communication pieces of how to communicate with someone living with dementia, how to recognize someone might be living with dementia. It's got some really good, you can direct families to it, or they can direct families to it, because it has some really good information on how to safety proof a house for a person living with dementia. It has some really great information on locating tools, locating devices, so GPS systems and tracking systems. It's got all kinds of great stuff on there. So I highly recommend that you guys can check out. I put a little information here on person-centered language. Person-centered language is a respectful language that we use when we're talking about people living with dementia. And so they have their own advocacy groups who have come up with the wording and the terminology they prefer used. And I think it's really important when people are in our first responders and working in the communities that they have a little bit of knowledge about what that is. It's sort of like it's sort of like we don't use the word midget, we use the word little people. There is a whole language for people living with dementia as well. And some of it, some of the terms used, like a demented person, does not go over well. Senile doesn't go over well. Victim or sufferer, Alzheimer's sufferer, that doesn't go over well. So there's some terminology that is preferred. So I put that there for you, just so you guys would have that knowledge. And something that Jillian and I spoke about, so I added it in here. This is the number one sort of reason that we find people living alone with dementia. This is the number one risk factor, is leaving on the stove, right? They turn it on, they forget it's on, they walk away, and next thing we know, we have a problem. We might have a fire. So there are some devices now that exist by quite a few different companies, and I put down sort of the three companies that have sort of been the front runners of this. But iGuard stove, so it uses a motion sensor, and when the person walks away from the stove and doesn't come back for a while, this will automatically shut the stove off. It will shut down the system, preventing fires. Fire Avert also, it doesn't use the motion sensor, but what it does, it's quite a bit cheaper than the iGuard. The iGuard works, very well, but the Fire Avert, if the smoke detector picks up on heat or smoke, then it shuts down the device. At that point, it shuts down the device, right? And then the other one, which also is a little bit cheaper than the iGuard. The iGuard I love, but it is expensive, is Cookstop. And Cookstop has a cheaper price than the iGuard, but also uses a motion sensor. So it will also shut down the system. Important to note, these devices can be used with any kind of stove, including gas. So it doesn't matter if it's gas or electric. They have models from these three companies that work with those. It doesn't matter the age of the stove or the oven. It can be, an older model or a brand new model. It doesn't matter. And so these are just some of the devices that I really recommend to families if they have a person living with dementia, especially a person who lives alone. And interesting to note, this isn't just great for a person who has dementia. There are other conditions, human conditions, like autism. There's other, mental illness. There's people also living in our communities who, due to their condition, may be forgetful about things like ovens on and stoves on. So this device can be used for lots of different groups for this reason. So I really like those. They all have a different price point, but I think they're a great investment. The way I sell it to families is well, it's really expensive when you have a fire in your home. The cleanup of that and the repair and the insurance and the whole thing is really, so paying the money up front to have a device that prevents that is so worth the investment. So that's how I put it to families, and they're usually pretty open to that. So that's something to know. Okay. If you run into families out there and they're having difficulty with the safety, maybe it's a hoarding issue, maybe it's that they don't know about these devices, maybe it's the person keeps going missing and you keep getting called to missing person incidents, like families are calling 911, the person's gone missing again, or the person's taken off with the car again, even though their license has been removed, things like that. They are a great, this is a great thing, is to refer them to an Alzheimer's Society chapter in your area. We have chapters all across Peel. We have free counseling, free education, and we'll make sure that those families understand the resources available to them and how to use them, how to connect with them, and how to put some safety plans in place, right? Around those things. Auto shut-off devices too, like auto shut-off kettles, auto shut-off, like things that will turn off, auto shut-off irons, all those things. So I always recommend to families, keep in mind those auto shut-off things, like replace things in the house with those. It's much safer. But if you guys want to refer somebody, you can contact your local Alzheimer's Society. We do have something called the First Link Referral, and first responders, whether it's EMS, fire, or police, are all able to make a First Link referral to the Alzheimer's Society chapter in their area. All of us have First Link referral forms. And you just need to get a contact person's permission from that family in order for us to reach out to the contact person, to start getting some resources and information, because sometimes the families aren't aware of how risky and how at risk the person living alone with dementia is. Sometimes they're just not aware. So we'll provide resources to those individuals. So hopefully that call stop. Okay. This is a First Link referral. You just go to our website. The referral's on the website. There is an electronic version that you can fill in, or you can print off and fill in if you prefer. But we do have the First Link referral on our website. So I'm just giving you the website information here, and I will send Jillian a copy of the slides, and she can share them with anybody who would like them. If you arrive at a call to 911 is received of a medical emergency, of course, fire would be involved, 911 is called. Upon arrival, the care partner, so the family care partner, needs medical care. And there's a person living with dementia in the home or in the car, wherever this is. What fire services have told us is that a commander can assign a fire service worker to work one-on-one with the person living with dementia, while the family care partner is being attended to. If they're the first one on scene, which you guys usually are, to support as soon as EMS arrives, then they can assign and focus on person living with dementia. So once the police are involved, they can remain with the person living with dementia until other arrangements for that person living with dementia can be made. The key here is that no first responder should ever leave the person living with dementia unattended and alone once the if there's like something that has to happen medically for the person, the caregiver, the family caregiver, because that's when really bad safety things can go wrong, when they're not they're used to having that support of the family member to supervise them, and that supervision is gone. So the key is just to remain with them until another family member can be arranged to be involved and come and be with the person living with dementia, or maybe to hospital or whatever it is, but we just don't want to leave that person alone. So fire services response to a car accident. Person living with dementia is the driver. Upon arrival, fire services notice that the person living with dementia is extremely confused and not sure of the present situation. So fire services will make sure the vehicle is secured, the person living with dementia is safe and not injured. Person living with dementia will present many of the same symptoms as the person in shock. So follow similar protocols. Remain calm, comforting, and ask those yes/no questions. Look for the medical alert bracelet with the blue symbol or any other identifying items, and remain with the person living with dementia at all times. Person living with dementia has been cooking, and there have been numerous incidents of smoke in the home. Person living with dementia lives alone. Firefighters have been called multiple times over the past couple of weeks. So firefighters responding to the calls will flag the home to the fire prevention team. Fire prevention team will do a home assessment, and upon completion, can connect that family to the Alzheimer's Society, right? Because we don't want you to keep getting those calls. Obviously, this family is unaware that they need to be more involved with the person living with dementia and safety proofing that home, right? So medical has called firefighters regarding possible hoarding issue. Fire services determines it is in fact severe hoarding that compromises the care partner and the person living with dementia's health and safety. So if home is an immediate threat, EMS can be called to bring residents to the hospital for a health check. Firefighters responding to the calls flag the home to the fire prevention team. Fire prevention team will do home assessment, and upon completion, please connect that family to the Alzheimer's Society. So we have the working groups across the province for fire have created some little communication cards. So one's a page, a one-pager. So I condensed it down on this slide, but it actually looks like this. So there is a one-pager that has some tips and strategies. And there is also a tip card that is from this slide here, but this is what the tip cards look like. So I can absolutely send this to all of you, the tip cards and the communication things, so you can use them for your fire services. So if you all want to, I'll put my email in the chat. You can all send me an address that you would like these mailed to, and I will mail them to you. Okay. But what the tip cards say basically for communication is the person living with dementia may not know they're lost. They may call out, call out their name in a friendly manner. If they don't respond, listen for singing, humming. People with dementia, when they can't communicate with words, will use other forms of communication. May have difficulty remembering, including their own name sometimes even, and they may not remember their address. They often don't remember their address. They may hide from searchers. Even calling their name. They may walk in a straight line. So if they've gone missing, they may walk in a straight line, and they will actually just go right over barriers or walk right through, like, so instead of veering off, you think, well, they couldn't have gone there because there's a barrier there, so they would have turned right or left. Person with dementia may have gone, they often walk in a straight line. So following the straight line is the easiest way to find them if they gone missing. They may not be able to problem solve. They will walk right through water. So instead of water being a barrier, and you think they turn off a different direction because there's a water hazard or whatever, they'll walk right through it often. Spatial and depth perception are affected. So they don't really judge distance well. If they get into a wooded area, they may just keep walking through the wooded area. So the straight line from wherever they were last seen is probably the quickest way to find them. On the tip cards, also for communication, approach the person from the front, identify yourself. If you're wearing a hat or you're wearing sunglasses, it's best to remove those to communicate with a person living with dementia. Maintain the eye contact. Repeat yourself using the same words twice. And if they don't understand that, start rephrasing or using fewer words in the communication. Use closed-ended questions, those yes/nos. Back up your words with actions. So pointing, gesturing, I love that Jamie was like showing the patch, like that kind of thing would be helpful. Again, writing out something and showing them in writing or handing it to them in writing is sometimes easier. And give the person a bit of space if they're agitated. You probably all are aware of this, but in first responder training, they always say if someone's extremely agitated, the last thing you want to do is actually put your hands on them. It's the same with dementia. If someone with dementia is very agitated, the last thing you want to do is actually touch them in that moment. That can be seen as a threat by the person who's confused by what's going on around them. So using your words to calm as opposed to your hands is a great way to put it. Okay, so that is the presentation on that has been come up with by the FIRE group and the Alzheimer's societies provincially. I'm going to put in the chat my email address, and you guys can let me know if there's any addresses you want me to send. You can just email me, and I will mail those tip cards to you, those communication cards. Jillian, I'll send you the slide deck.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Hearing none at the moment. Is there
Okay.
anything in the chat? Is there anything in the chat that needs to be answered?
Just
No,
a
I think-
comment from Donna that she's so impressed with the information and
Mhm.
great presentation. No questions though.
So Danielle, thank you very, very much on behalf of the Ontario Association of Fire Educators for spending the last 45 minutes sharing all that wonderful information, all those tips, all those websites, all those resources. I'm sure that we as public educators can actually use a lot of that information, but definitely we can share that with our crews, the firefighters that's actually responding to those motor vehicle collisions and to those fires. So thank you very much. Great information. And on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the presentation. And we'll look forward to receiving those tip sheets.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jillian. Thanks everybody for having me today. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.